Welcome, and many thanks for tuning in to the launch of the 5th round of the Institutional Challenge Grant competition. My name is Lauren Supplee. I'm a Senior Program Officer here at the William T. Grant Foundation. The focus of today's webinar is an overview of the goals of the Institutional Challenge Grant. I'll then speak more about the award and the application review process. We'll have time for questions. Throughout the webinar, please send us your questions through the question box in your control panel in the WebEx feature. Lastly, please know the slides and the recording from today's webinar will be posted within 2 weeks. Let's get started. The Foundation's mission is to support research to improve the lives of young people focused on youth ages 5 to 25 in the United States. The Foundation has 2 areas of focus for its research grant making. Our Reducing Inequality initiative was launched in 2014. The defining feature of this initiative is a focus on responses to inequality, not the causes or consequences. We support studies that help us understand how programs, policies, and practices reduce inequality in outcomes among young people in the United States. Our Use of Research Evidence initiative was launched in 2008 and refocused in 2015. The defining feature of this initiative is its focus on strategies to improve the use of research evidence, not on the barrier to use. We support studies that help us understand how to create the conditions that improve the production and use of research evidence in ways that benefit youth. Importantly, the Institutional Challenge Grant brings these 2 focus areas together. It facilitates research that yields knowledge useful to decision makers and research that's used in ways to improve youth outcomes. We believe that it is a central mission to both public and private universities to not only create top quality research, but to give back to the community by supporting community-engaged research. 2 of the crises facing our country in the last year highlighted ways where university and community partnerships have the potential to make a difference. The Institutional Challenge Grant was designed to bridge the gap between research produced and research being used. It builds on more than a decade of research funded by the Foundation to understand the conditions under which research is used and how to improve the use of research in policy and practice. It aims to support research on reducing inequalities under the conditions that can make research more likely to be used. At the same time, we know the capacity, motivation, and opportunities are needed at an institutional level to make headway on this issue. This grant encourages research institutions to build sustained institutional partnerships with a public agency or nonprofit organization. The Research Practice Partnership will have defined objectives, roles, and agreements that will be built for the long term. In this way, the partnership will be mutually beneficial, enabling the partners to develop and pursue a joint research agenda that is relevant to the public and nonprofit organization's work over an extended period of time. Second, the goal of this grant is to pursue a joint research agenda to reduce inequality in youth outcomes. The partnership's research will aim to build, test, or increase understanding of programs, policies, or practices to reduce inequality in the academic, social, behavioral, or economic outcomes of young people ages 5 to 25 in the United States. Specifically, the research agenda will seek to inform responses to inequality on the basis of race, ethnicity, economic standing, language minority status, or immigrant origins. Third, this grant is hoping to create the institutional change to value research practice partnerships within research institutions. The research institution will design a feasible strategy for institutional change that addresses the structural, motivational, and financial barriers that inhibit research practice partnerships by establishing structural supports and incentives that encourage skilled mid-career researchers to conduct joint work with policymakers and practitioners. The institution will develop an environment for partnerships to thrive. And finally, this grant was hoping to develop the capacity of both partners to collaborate on producing and using research evidence. Grantees on the research side will have new experiences that foster deeper understandings of a given policy or practice context, and the skills required to serve as an effective partner. At the same time, the public agency or nonprofit partner will also bolster their capacity to understand, conduct, and use research through activities such as technical assistance, infrastructure improvement, or staff training. While we understand this challenge is ambitious, we believe this is what is needed to produce and use relevant research in impactful ways. I'll now walk through each of these 4 areas individually with a little more detail and example. So starting with partnerships. The Foundation defines research practice partnerships as long-term, mutually beneficial collaborations that promote the production and use of rigorous and relevant research. Partnerships adopt a long view, persisting beyond a single project, involve relationships between institutions as well as individuals, and that benefit both parties. A growing body of work suggests that partnerships help researchers develop an understanding of the local context, learn about the needs and questions of policymakers and practitioners, and provide insights that can lead to groundbreaking research. Research practice partnerships also benefit the public agency or nonprofit organization. They help policymakers or practitioners gain access to existing research, contribute to a research agenda that's relevant for their context, and receive assistance in the efforts to use research evidence. For these reasons, partnerships are a promising strategy for producing and using research. I also want to call your attention to a special area of our website devoted to research practice partnerships. This may serve as a helpful resource as you develop your application. The website also houses other resources we think that you should look at and revisit every year as our program evolves. You can find a link in the application guidance for this grant program and the handout for this webinar. Second, pursuing the joint research agenda to reduce inequality in youth outcomes. As I mentioned earlier, the research practice partnerships involved in the Institutional Challenge Grant must pursue a research agenda to reduce inequality in youth outcomes. We contend that inequality on the basis of economic, racial, ethnic, and immigrant origins is pervasive. That evidence often exists about the causes and consequences of inequality, but the ways to reduce inequality are less well understood. A goal of this partnership's work is to increase the utility and strength of research evidence available to inform responses to inequality. Third, the institutional challenge portion, some may feel is the greatest challenge. While research practice partnerships can be rewarding, they are also time-intensive and require supports from the institutions involved. The policies and practices within institutions may inadvertently create barriers to a partnership's success. For example, promotion criteria often value publishing in academic outlets, publishing often, and publishing on a narrow range of topics. These incentives may make it difficult to attract and retain public agencies or nonprofits as partners, and difficult to attract and retain experienced researchers who want to address questions relevant to policy and practice. It can discourage members of the partnership from spending time on cultivating those relationships and the trust that's needed for a partnership to sustain. In turn, these long-standing reward structures may limit participation between and within institutions, obstruct career advancement, and undermine the longevity of the partnership. The Institutional Challenge Grant requires research institutions to examine and redesign internal policies and practices in ways that encourage sustained institutional partnerships with public agencies or nonprofit organizations, in ways that incentivize exceptional researchers to initiate and pursue rigorous and relevant research agendas, and in ways that improve the partnership skills of researchers. In short, we hope the program catalyzes institutional change to better value research practice partnerships and their work. This is challenging but important. We have seen in our current grantees bold proposals for institutional change. We've seen university centers that are focused on raising the quality and visibility of community-based research and a source to connect community-based agencies to your university researchers. We've seen centering community-engaged work into university strategic plans. Universities supported seed grants to faculty to nurture early-stage partnership. Focused efforts on hiring faculty with research practice partnership expertise. Endowed professorship and university-supported leadership positions focused on community-engaged research. Guidelines for IRBs on reviewing community-engaged research, and revisions to merit, tenure, and promotion criteria that recognize community-engaged research as research over service and offer additional time on tenure clocks for those involved in partnerships, as well as support such as formal teaching releases for faculty involved in partnership research and collaborations across university systems. In addition to these kinds of bold, achievable institutional change mechanisms, we welcome your great ideas. So finally, the goal of developing the capacity of both partners to collaborate on producing and using research evidence. We know from research on improving the use of research evidence that all human behavior requires capacity to engage in the activity, including the knowledge, skills, and tools, the motivation, including attitudes and beliefs, and their opportunity to do the behaviors the environment supports and doesn't impede that behavior. Organizations with absorptive capacity are more likely to use research. This means organizations demonstrating the capability to recognize and value new information, assimilate it, and apply it in novel ways as part of organizational routines, policies, and practices. Applicants will want to consider on the practice side of the partnership, where are there opportunities to build the capacity, motivation, and opportunity for using research to improve policies and practices. In current grantees, some of the capacity building activities we've seen include building the skills on the partner side to understand and engage in and advance research. We've seen building skills on the research side to write policy briefs and give presentations to policy leadership on research. Strengthening data systems to collect useful data and ways to collect contextual data to understand problems of practice. Collaboration on tools that support the integration of research and data to address problems of practice, and embedding research-focused leadership positions into the practice organization, such as directors of evaluations and agencies, along with co-designing research agendas. The success of the partnership will also depend on the capacity of both partners to collaborate, produce, and use high-quality research. The grant includes a requirement for mid-career fellows. The mid-career is defined as 8 to 20 years since a doctoral degree or completion of residency for the research fellow, and 8 to 20 years of cumulative experience in his or her current role for a policy or practice fellow. The fellows should be established in their career with significant expertise and clear contributions to the project. The mid-career fellows need requisite skills to carry out the proposed work. This includes not only conducting the research, but also building the partnership and capacity building within the project. So the plan for a research fellow in this grant must significantly extend their skills to be effective partners and make the integration of research and decision-making feasible within the practice organization. In our current grantees, some of the fellows include selecting fellows from existing faculty that have the motivation and skills to do partnership work, selecting fellows with prior experience doing bridge spanning work between research and government, and selecting one faculty fellow and one partner fellow to work together to advance the research agenda and goals. So we're going to pause here for some questions. Please send us your questions through the question box in the control panel.
Hi, Lauren. Great work. Adam Gamoran here, president of the foundation, and I'm going to field the questions and lob them over to Lauren. So the first question is one that often comes up. It's a question about whether networks that include multiple community partners rather than just one community partner and an academic institution appropriate candidates for an institutional challenge grant.
Sure, applications can include multiple partners. We'd really encourage the applicant, though, to make very clear what's the added value of each of their partners and how they contribute to the overall goals of the grant.
And we've got some examples of past winners that have worked with multiple partners. And so if you look at our materials, you'll see some of those examples. Several of the questions deal with the target populations. For example, one person writes who works with a program that focuses on Black LGBTQ youth. Does that fit our guidelines?
Yes, so we would prioritize the projects that are examining inequalities based on race, but we are very interested in projects that are also looking at intersectionality. So being clear about where the area of inequality for the population and thinking carefully about how the intersectionality is contributing to that inequality.
And here's a couple that I'm gonna take that are related. There are two questions about inequality for children with disabilities. One focused specifically on deaf and hard of hearing children as a linguistic minority, and one just asking generally about children with disabilities. And first of all, the foundation has always made the case that applicants who can make a strong case for inequality facing a particular population of youth are welcome to make that case. And second, as Lauren has just stated, arguing about intersectionality as one of our questioners does, youth with disabilities, which often intersects with issues of race and economic status. That's also welcome. And then specifically with request to the question about arguing that deaf and hard of hearing children are a linguistic minority, I think that is certainly an argument that can be made. And depending on the strength of the case for inequality facing such children, would receive a fair hearing and would be eligible for the competition. Now, Lauren, here's another one for you. Is there an expectation on the size of the agency partner? For example, would a partnership with a state child welfare agency be closer to what you have in mind than a partnership with a local Black, Indigenous, people of color-led agency or a coalition of agencies?
No, we welcome innovative proposals from either small or large organizations. Again, just being very clear in the application about why this partnership is advancing the goals and thinking carefully about the partnership and the characteristics they're bringing to what's being proposed.
So if a practice fellow has been doing policy work for years, but is new in her position, can she qualify for the practice fellow? I think here the question, Lauren, is could you elaborate a little bit more on the qualifications or eligibility for the practice fellow?
Sure, and I'll look to you, Adam, to add in anything that I leave out of this answer. But the practice fellow, as we mentioned in the application guidance, needs 8 to 20 years experience in doing the kind of work at the level that they're being asked to conduct it in the project. So it's not about holding this specific position, but it's really about their overall experience.
Exactly, I would say the same. Moving down the question, just a reminder to everyone that the slides and the audio from this presentation will be available about 2 weeks after the webinar. There's, Lauren, a question about methods, for example, survey methods, intervention approaches, participatory action research. How open are we to different methods of research?
We are very open to many different kinds of research, qualitative research, quantitative research, mixed methods research. I think the more important piece of it for us is making sure that the research methodology proposed aligns tightly to the research questions that are being asked in the proposal.
Thanks. And more questions about the fellows. Here's one that maybe a couple that I'll take as to whether the career fellow from the academic, the mid-career fellow from the academic side needs to be faculty or can it be research staff. There is not a requirement that the mid-career fellow be a faculty member. The person could play any role at the university. I will say the overall goal of the Institutional Challenge Grant Program is to bring highly productive, highly esteemed, outstanding university-based researchers to do partnership oriented engaged scholarship. So if your setup, if your design responds to that goal, the fellow can be in any role at the university. Someone asked whether youth must be a central focus of the research. Lauren, can you give a quick response to that?
Yes, yes, we are prioritizing youth 5 to 25. It may mean that some research projects have some participants that may be slightly outside of that age range, but the majority of the youth and the focus of the research questions should be on that priority age population.
So there are some questions here about budgeting, and I'll just answer them without getting into all the specifics of the questions that are coming up. That applicants have a lot of flexibility with regard to budgeting, with regard to how they use the budget. As you'll see in the application guide, the fellows need to be funded 2/3 by the grant and 1/3 by the university. That is one FTE fellow from the university for 1 year. The PI may be a fellow, but is not required to be a fellow. Often the PI is a more senior faculty member, a more senior leader in the university, because we are looking for PIs who are positioned to help shape the incentive structure within the university to create strong positive conditions for a partnership-oriented engaged scholarship. Does the research partner have to be university-based? Yes. Do the fellows, so here's a question, Lauren, it goes back to what you were saying about different ways of proposing fellows. Do the specific fellows need to be mentioned in the application, or can an applicant describe the process and criteria for selecting the fellows if they receive the award?
They can do either. So if there are specific fellows already in mind, then the application should really be clear about how the expertise of those fellows aligns with the overall goals of the project and the research being conducted. If there are not fellows that are currently named and would be named in the proposal, then the applicants need to lay out a clear plan of how they will be selecting fellows that will help achieve the goals of the overall grant and the research being proposed.
Lauren, do we award grants to HBCUs? Could they be a research partner, or could a fellow come from an HBCU?
Yes, we would love to see an application from an HBCU.
In fact, we had an application from an HBCU that did pretty well. Didn't make it all the way to the finals, but did pretty well in last year's competition. So let's talk about what it means for a principal investigator of an institutional challenge grant to be a leader in the institution. And this listener rightly acknowledges that the language is vague on purpose, and that's because we can't prescribe what kind of leadership or specific role the principal investigator is going to take on or holds in the university. The idea is that in your application, you will convince the selection committee that this program of work under the leadership of this principal investigator has the chance to leverage the university to strengthen its appreciation for, valuing of, and support for partnership-oriented engaged scholarship. Some of our principal investigators have been deans, some have been faculty members, but in all cases, the committee was convinced that there was a route towards the kind of institutional change that Lauren described. Lauren, here's a question from a listener. It's a good question, I think. If we are at the beginning of our partnership, no prior work prior to now, but we can demonstrate a shared history, a clear commitment, and a vision for the partnership, would we be competitive?
So I'll answer this in two ways. So more generally about partnerships, we're looking for partnerships where the selection committee is going to see clear evidence that these partners have worked together well and have will likely work together well through the term of the grant. So it can't be brand new partnerships where that's going to be an open question. We're also not looking for partnerships that are so well established that the activities in the grant would have probably happened anyway without the grant. But it's up to really the applicants to put in their application that convincing information for the selection committee about why this partnership is going to accomplish these goals, what's the strength of this partnership, and how well is it going to be able to achieve the goals laid out in the grant.
Thank you. And again, the PI and the university-based fellow do not need to be the same people. Typically, they are not. Sometimes they are. A partnership can involve multiple nonprofit organizations. University matching, the university match can be in kind. That is, they can release a faculty member from other duties to the degree that they are able to carry out the work of a fellow, a release of 100% or 50% over 2 different time periods. So yes, the match can be in kind. As long as it adds up to 1 FTE. A couple of questions about how close to youth outcomes the research has to get. One asking, well, what if our partner is an organization that doesn't work directly with youth, but for example, works with teachers, or you could imagine service providers in some other field of youth work? Well, ultimately, the goal is to reduce inequality in youth outcomes, so that although there is not a restriction on who the partner is, there would be an expectation that at some level, at some point, the research would move towards examining youth outcomes to see whether inequality had been reduced. Some of these questions are answered in the handout, which is the application guide. So I'm not going to go into every single one of them. Please see the application guide for many of your questions, details about who's in what role. And oh, I can see, Lauren, that it's time for us to move on to the rest of the webinar. I will try to answer as many of these questions as I can in the question box. So I'll write out answers to them, especially the simple, clear-cut ones where the answer is going to be, look at the application guide. And then we'll pause one more time at the end of your second presentation to take questions again. So Lauren, back to you.
Okay, great. And my presentation may answer some of your questions as well. So we're now going to turn our attention to the award, application, and review process. The Institutional Challenge Grant provides $650,000 for 3 years, with the possibility of a 2-year funded renewal to solidify the partnership and institutional change pieces. The money within the grant closely maps onto the goals of the program. So applicants can allot up to 9 months to support joint planning to refine activities, such as selecting fellows and finalizing partnership agreements. There are also funds for the partnership to conduct research to reduce inequality in youth outcomes. As stated earlier, the award includes funding for the equivalent of 1 full-time mid-career fellow per year for 2 years. Resources to support activities that develop both partners' capacities are also part of the grant. There is an indirect cost allowance of up to 15% for total direct costs. In addition to funding from the foundation, as Adam mentioned, the research institution must contribute the equivalent of 1 FTE fellow for 1 year. This can be paid through in-kind contributions like course buyouts or through other grant funding. As you develop your application, please keep in mind the Foundation's aspirations for this award. At the end of 5 years, 3 years initial grant and 2 years for a potential renewal, we expect the research institution will have established a set of strategies that facilitate sustained research collaborations with public agencies or nonprofit organizations. The public agency or nonprofit organization has increased its capacity to use research. Participating researchers have improved their partnership skills, and the research generated has been used in decision-making and is likely to lead to improved outcomes for youth. The 2021 Institutional Challenge Grant applications are due September 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The full proposal includes all agreements and statements of support, so it's good to start early. There are no letters of inquiry for this competition. The application guidelines that Adam has mentioned briefly already are in the handout section here in this webinar, as well as on our website. And the portal for this grant opens tomorrow. Once submitted, senior staff review the 4-page structured abstract. The abstract is a critical component of the application, and at this stage in the process, other materials are only reviewed as needed. Applications that fit with the Foundation's interests and that have been responsive to the call for proposals are moved on to the selection committee for further review. Each proposal that's moved forward is assigned to 2 committee members who conduct in-depth reviews of the entire proposal. These reviews are shared with applicants. In addition, the proposal that receives the highest ranking are deliberated in a selection committee meeting that happens in December. These deliberations rely heavily on the structured abstracts, as it's not possible for every committee member to read every proposal. The selection committee then selects 3 to 5 finalists. Those finalists are provided the opportunity for a written response to any reviewer feedback, and then the partners attend an in-person interview at the Foundation. At least one partnership is then recommended for award. The selection committee is made up of individuals who have held a variety of professional roles, including university presidents, provosts, center directors, leaders of state and local agencies, and researchers and practitioners engaged in partnerships. They also represent a diverse range of interests, including education, mental health, justice, and child welfare. They vary in their experiences working in and with public and private research institutions and are accomplished, excited, and supportive group of individuals. The program for the 2021-2022 competition remains unchanged. We are keeping our focus on university-based research institutes, schools, or centers committed to supporting partnerships to pursue research agendas on reducing inequality. We also continue to encourage proposals from teams with persons of color in leadership roles, either as the project's principal investigator from the university or as the lead and from the public agency or nonprofit organization. We welcome partnerships across a range of domains, including child welfare and mental health, housing, justice, education, and others. And resubmissions are welcome. We look forward to receiving all of your proposals. We recognize the application is demanding and have developed a number of resources to assist with this process. I encourage you to visit the Foundation's website to read and reread the application guide. The application guide includes all of the topics discussed here today and the specifics about applying and the selection criteria. There are also a variety of blogs that will be upcoming over this next year, including the ones focusing on how past ICG grantees have been able to make institutional change and how a research practice partnership has weathered significant challenges of COVID to sustain their partnership. You may also find it helpful to learn more about the partnerships funded to date and descriptions of each partnership, their proposed research, and their plans for proposed institutional change, all available on our website. Presented here and on the website are the 9 awards made during the first 4 rounds of competition. Please note the research partners includes public and private institutions, different colleges and departments within those institutions, including economics, public health, education, and human ecology. They also represent different geographic regions. Likewise, the public and nonprofit partners include community organizations, school districts, and 2 regional agencies. We also welcome city and state agencies as public partners. You may be wondering, how are we able to make 6 awards in 3 years if our intent is to make 1 award a year? Due to the generosity of the Spencer Foundation, the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, and the American Institutes for Research, we have been able to make 1 additional award in 2018, 2 additional awards in 2019, and 2 additional awards in 2020. While we intend to award at least 1 grant per year in the future years, we also awarded our first continuation award to Cornell University this year for an additional 2 years of funding to further solidify the progress they made in their initial 3 years. Before we finish up, let's pause again for any additional questions. As I mentioned earlier, please send us the questions through the question box in your control panel. Thank you again for joining us, and we remain excited about the possibilities the Institutional Challenge Grant presents and this meaningful work that can be done in these grants.
Thanks, Lauren. Well, the questions have continued to come in, and it's pretty hard to keep up, but people are asking really thoughtful and interesting questions. So one question is, how important is it to propose a specific research project or program of research as opposed to supporting a network that supports collaborative, academically partnered research in a flexible and responsive way?
So you could think about this in 2 ways. So one is that, as I've mentioned in the webinar, the Institutional Challenge Grant does look for research activities to reduce inequality, and part of the review is to look at the research being proposed and the quality of the review of the research being proposed in the application. But we also are interested in joint determined research agendas between the university and partner. We also understand that sometimes new issues emerge over time, and the partnership should be able to support any new needs of the partner agency. It's all about making very clear to the selection committee what is going to be done and how it's going to answer questions of inequality. Would you add anything, Adam?
No, that sounds good. I'm going to give you 2 questions in a row that are closely related. Both have to do with direct versus indirect focus on children. So the first is, how about working with parents of children in the appropriate age range? Would that be okay, or should the data primarily be gathered from the children themselves? And likewise, another question, a study on undocumented immigrants and refugees that examines the well-being of household outcomes with an implication that children are part of the households.
So I'll start, and Adam, I'd appreciate if you add to this answer as well. So we want to see that this is reducing inequality for youth. So in both of those instances, that piece would need to be pulled out clearly. So for example, under parenting, there need to be strong empirical and theoretical research supporting that changes in that parenting aspect would contribute to reductions in youth inequality.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Nothing to add. Someone has asked whether, but here's a question I will answer. Someone has asked whether this is the last year of the Institutional Challenge Grant competition, and it is true that when we started it 5 years ago, we made a 5-year commitment, but we are very enthusiastic about the success of the program so far, and I have every expectation that we will be mounting a competition in 2022, just as we are in 2021. So how many applicants do we usually have in one cycle, and how many do we award? I think Lauren has spoken to the awards. Our numbers of applications have ranged between 20 and I guess 45, somewhere around that range. So it's varied. There are a lot of ups and downs. I can say based on this webinar that there's a great deal of interest, and we had 36 applications last year and we made 3 awards. Could you talk a little bit, Lauren, about the relationship between the university partner and the policy partner and how that deepens over the course of their collaborative work?
Sure. So I think the criteria that we've seen in strong partnerships is a true understanding from the research side about the kinds of challenges that the partner program is facing, and demonstrates how strategies on how to work with them to potentially respond to those challenges. And on the partnership side, an understanding of what research might contribute to helping them answer questions of practice or policy issues, and how this partnership under research could help contribute to answering those issues.
Thank you. Could a public school system be the partner for an institutional challenge grant?
Yes.
Indeed, and several have. Let's see, a bunch of other details that are found in the application guide. Okay, someone wants to know, if I got a PhD more than 20 years ago and I left to be a practitioner, but then I returned to a research position within the past 8 to 20 years, can I still apply? And the answer is, you can apply, but you can't be the MidCareer Fellow, because the MidCareer Fellow is for people between 8 and 20 years post-PhD. Let's see. Lauren, what do you think about the viability of applications that have behavioral health outcomes, such as reducing inequalities in food security and its relationship with obesity?
So we are interested in outcomes for youth that fall under behavioral health. We are less interested in physical health outcomes, but it's really, I would encourage the applicant to make a strong case in their application of how the inequality exists now, and how that's contributing to inequality for youth outcomes, and why it's a priority to answer.
Great. Previous awardees are mainly Tier 1 research universities. Are there allowances for other universities, for example, those that are minority serving institutions? We welcome applications from all universities and would be enthusiastic about applications from minority serving institutions. It is a competition, and so we are looking for strong applications that succeed in the competition. And we would certainly welcome, as we say in the application guide, applications that are led by persons from persons of color. Let's see. So one person has asked whether an applicant can apply for multiple applications across the William T. Grant Foundation's grant making opportunities. Do you want to handle that one, Lauren?
Sure. So yes, you can apply for multiple grant opportunities, though we would also just caution that because it is a competition, and all of our grants are highly competitive, putting your best foot forward into a strong proposal would be recommended. But you can hold a grant in one of our other portfolios and then apply for this. Similarly, we often get questions about whether there can be multiple applications from the same university. And again, that is possible, but we'd like to caution that then that university and the two teams within it are then competing against each other for the same number of awards.
Thanks, Lauren. I think that's a good answer. And I think that wraps it up for the questions. I appreciate all the questions that people have asked today, and if I missed any, I will try to write the answers in the question box or to respond with follow-up emails. But I think we've done a pretty good job of covering the questions that have come in.
Great, and we look forward to seeing all of your proposals.